on February 7th, House Education. We're going to spend about a half an hour now. We've got a presentation from folks at Energy Efficiency Investments Incorporated. We have one or two folks, just one. And you are?
Michael Davey.
Come on up, introduce yourself. Talk to us about what you do in schools. And I think that, we'd also sort of love to hear what you're finding out there in schools when you go and work with them.
Sure. So first of all, my company, we do work in five of the 6 New England states. A lot here in Vermont. We have an office in Colchester and we have 7 employees in Vermont, primarily working on school energy efficiency and ventilation projects. Our first major project was in 2013, we did the Bennington Elementary School District before they consolidated. That project was pretty exciting in that we went into the 3 elementary schools in Bennington, which really hadn't had much work done since the 1960s. And they had classroom unit ventilators, which if you've been in a classroom, they're the big boxes on the outside wall that let ventilation air in and heat it up. In general, those systems were running with pneumatic controls, so they don't have electronic systems to know, if it's running or not. You're just kind of relying on 1960s technology. And that was running all 3 of the elementary schools in Bennington. And what happened, because there was no reliable controls, what a lot of times they would do is block off the ventilation, because the worst thing you can have is let that cold air on a day like, Friday come in and start freezing the kids. So the easiest quick solution is to block that ventilation. So what we did is we went through and put in a ducted ventilation system. And that was done, well before COVID, but what actually, as a result of that, they had very robust systems at the elementary school. So all they had to, when COVID came out and the state and ASHRAE and the federal government were making regulations, all Bennington really had to do at their elementary schools to comply was put in a beefier filter in the brand new equipment and very good air quality. What was unique about that project in Bennington is we used the energy savings from doing upgraded boilers, LED lights, and new controls to help pay for those ventilation equipment. So we were able to go to the voters of Bennington with a bond warrant article that the energy savings paid about 60% of the tax impact from the bond. So after that project passed and was pretty successful, we were hired by Mill River School District and did a very similar project. And that was a newly formed district. They were very tax sensitive. So on that project, we had the energy savings pay for 100% of the project. So it was a new wood chip boiler, LED lighting, and again, controls. Because it was tax neutral and had 0 tax impact and 0 state aid, we couldn't tackle the ventilation as robustly as we did in Bennington. So their high school at Mill River still has the unit ventilators. After that, we started growing. We did the Addison Northwest School District, which was the Virgins area. And we did, again, a project there and where the energy savings paid about 65% of the bond payment with doing new boilers. We did robust ventilation at the high school. And there was some certainty about the future of some of the outer schools. So there was a little bit of, they had an Addison Central School, which was, do we keep it, do we not discussion. That I don't know if that's been resolved, but at the time
It has.
It has.
Project didn't do any work there.
Yeah. So then most recently we did a project in Springfield using their federal funds to do a comprehensive ventilation and lighting upgrade to their high school. We're also working with Franklin, the Franklin Elementary School, doing a ventilation and heating upgrade there. So we're kind of down from the southwest corner down to Springfield and then all the way up to Franklin County, and doing some work in Chittenden County and in Rutland as well. So we kind of throughout the state, we've been working. And so as a result of that, I think maybe with the exception of one or two other people like Norm Etkins, who works for the Superintendent's Association, but besides him, I think I've seen more heating systems and square footages of Vermont schools than most other people. And what I basically see is probably not a surprise. A lot of ventilation systems that were put in 1950s to 1970s that don't in general have the filtration that's recommended by COVID, post-COVID standards. They don't have the energy efficiency that allows for energy recovery that the newer systems have. And they're to take basically what this 1950s technology, which is a box on the outside of the wall that opens up to let air in and heat it up, and to put in a ducted system is generally a multi-million-dollar expenditure for these buildings. You know, obviously the smaller the school, the less the expense, but at Springfield High School, it was more than a $5 million project, to give you an idea, that without federal funds probably wouldn't have happened. And so what we've seen, we've heard there's been a lot of discussion about school building aid. And because we work in 5 of the 6 New England states, I think we have some information that might be helpful to you guys about what's working there, what's working in Vermont, what's not working in New Hampshire and stuff like that. So questions and answers, feel free to fire questions off, or I can just keep going a little bit more on what we, so I guess I'll pause if there's any questions so far.
Sure, Representative Austin.
Just real quickly, that, I talked to someone else who was working in schools about that system of using the energy savings to fund the project.
Yeah.
There's a name, it's called something.
Energy performance contract.
Right.
And there's actually, and I can't cite it off the top of my head, but there was a law that allowed, that Vermont passed that allowed the school districts to enter into these types of contracts. And they're not a panacea, meaning you're not going to get a new school with a performance contract. You're not going to solve all your problems. What you can do is use that energy savings to help improve the energy efficiency, reduce your carbon footprint, and improve the ventilation. So in the days when there was building aid, you might get, 30, 60, 50% building aid. That was something that helps. In this post-building aid era, using that energy efficiency is sort of been a way to at least go to the voters and say, listen, we know we're asking for $5 million or whatever, but we are going to save, to give you an example, in Virgins, we're saving them $400,000 a year in energy expenditure. So that goes a long way to helping with that bond payment. Now, there is the extra effort of having to explain that to the voters. And sometimes that's a hard process because you have savings over the life of the bond. But we actually did, just 2 years ago, we passed one for the Hannaford Career Center in Middlebury. And we were able to do video voter outreach and really explain the way we were doing solar power and ventilation upgrades. And that passed, I think, with more than 75% of the vote. So it's a way to help get these projects through and reduce the tax impact for the voters.
Are you on the hook in some way if you don't meet the performance?
Yes.
Explain that a little bit.
So basically, it's a guaranteed energy savings, and we report back to the schools annually on how much they've saved and if there's a shortfall. So, for example, if we had told Virgins we were going to save $400,000 and they only saved $300,000, we would be responsible for a 1-year payment of the variance. And so this is a tool. I think we don't do a great job of marketing this tool. So it's sort of been word of mouth. And, and we only have so much bandwidth. So when you hear, we've sort of done essentially one to two districts a year historically. One of the things that we've seen in the states that have a ton of building aid is this type of tool gets pushed aside. And the reason being is a lot of times we hear about it. I'll give you Maine, for example, or Massachusetts. The state comes in with funding, and the worse your building is, the higher you score to get a new building or a major renovation. So there's this kind of perverse incentive to let your building fall apart so you can score worse. So then you can come to the state and say, we have the worst building, we get a new school. And so that's just one of the things that I didn't know if people were aware of, is that you don't want to create a school building aid fund that disincentivizes energy efficiency and disincentivizes proper maintenance of buildings. I understand force ranking and there's reasons for it, but this is a tool that we think can help most Vermont districts tackle at least the heating ventilation side of the needs. Also, from just a carbon standpoint, making existing buildings more energy efficient is a much better life cycle than knocking a building down and building new and all the carbon that goes into new construction and shipping materials. If we can take the aging infrastructure of our Vermont schools and make them more energy efficient, it's a much better emissions profile. And we can show that you can go to a school like Virgins and reduce the high school's energy usage by 30-40% through these projects, which is a big dent.
But that's only if the sole goal is to improve your energy efficiency. I mean, there are other reasons that people say we should knock down this building.
Yes.
If it's basically used up itself.
Or if it's underutilized and there's not enough kids to justify.
We just did this big statewide inventory, which came up with whatever that index is.
Yeah.
It sort of says to you, it's an early indicator that maybe you want to think about replacement rather than renovation. Mm-hmm. It does not take into account the carbon footprint impact of doing that, however. It just says it might make more financial sense.
Right.
So talking about new construction, I know we've talked a lot about retrofitting, but do you also help with schools that are maybe thinking about new construction?
Not in general, we don't play in. So for example, like a Burlington High School, we typically don't get into a brand new school, mostly because our model is based on, hey, you're using 20,000 gallons of oil. We're going to get you down to, and so it's not a huge fit in brand new construction. What we can do is when there's small additions or major renos to existing buildings, that's where we can come in and play. Not successfully too much in new construction.
So on Wednesday, we have the head of the Rhode Island school construction sort of system. Mm-hmm. Do you work in Rhode Island, and can you talk a little bit about what works and what doesn't work there? Yeah,
we do work in Rhode Island, and their state funding is been a sort of a little bit of a godsend to the districts that were cash strapped. So, Rhode Island is a little bit of a different animal in that they have some cities with some major financial challenges. So much so that like Central Falls and Providence and Woonsocket are always on like the verge of bankruptcy and take receivership by the state. So their biggest districts have massive budget problems. And so they were really unable to do almost anything besides stay afloat in those major population centers. So when there was some building aid that came in, it was the first time projects had been done for just decades and decades. Their funding is very different in that it's comes in through the state. The state kind of prioritizes, and then the state sort of picks which projects get any funding at all, which is I think the Vermont school boards might have more local control typically in those types of decisions than what I've seen. And so, I think Rhode Island is a place where they could even benefit more if they use the performance contracting model more. But I think they were starting from just nothing and just really, their three largest cities in such financial disarray that I think just getting anything going was a big godsend for them.
Representative Binion.
Yeah, I guess I had a question about scope and whether you've had issues with triggering code upgrades. Yeah, that's been a problem for my community, where if you want to replace the boiler, and we do, then you have to come up to code on ADA, on fire, on seismic. And so have you seen that kind of stuff? How do you deal with it?
Yeah, so in general, so some municipalities in Vermont have active building departments, but that's a minority. Most of the schools that we work in have the state fire marshal's office oversees the construction. And so anytime we start a project, after we get a general idea of what the school board wants to do, that's our first call where we say, which projects would trigger, let's say, adding a sprinkler system to the school? Which projects are considered maintenance that don't trigger code upgrades? And then in general, a simple boiler replacement usually doesn't trigger, let's say, a major code upgrade. But if you were to do an addition or a major renovation, that's when they start really saying ADA sprinkler systems, are those up to par? One thing that was surprising for me is that there are quite a few large Vermont schools that have no sprinkler systems. That was, in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, that's less common. You don't see that as much as you did in Vermont. So for example, Springfield High School, when we started, had no sprinkler system at all. And that's a very large building that we're starting to put one in as part of our assessment. We kind of identified it, and I think it was not even really known to the current board that there was a major, a school that size, multiple stories, that didn't have fire protection.
And so when you do encounter that because of your size, is that sort of, maybe this is for somebody else?
No, what we typically do is put that, so if we were to go to the board or go to the voters, it would be sort of an alternate, like, do you want, while we're here putting in ductwork, it's really the right time to put in a sprinkler system as opposed to take the ceiling down. And then actually for Jens Elementary, we added a sprinkler system for the same reason. We were in there doing ventilation and we added that sprinkler system.
Representative Austin, then Representative Buss.
Yep. I'm just wondering, is there any circumstance where a town would not need to bond because you could justify not having to bond because of the offsetting savings?
So in general, the energy savings, there are projects, I'll give you an example, that Mill River project. Over the 20-year life of the bond or lease, the energy savings completely paid for the work. But to do the 3 million in work, we still had to get a lease to finance it. The only time where you would have no lease or bond with a performance contract would be if there's a big capital reserve fund to pay for the project, or if the payback was less than 1 year, which is not typical. But let's say you left the window, there's no windows whatsoever, and you put in windows and we can pay for that in a year, then you don't need financing. But I'd say 95% of the time, these projects either do a municipal lease or a bond.
So if a school just has a long history of committing $1 million a year to construction,
That's right.
that's not good enough. You really need that guarantee of a bond.
So no, you could do $1 million a year, just chip away at stuff. Yes, that would be doable. And this is just thinking outside the box, but one of the things that the state aid could help with, if you ever bring that back, is so let's just say, pick a town, Norwich needed a new heating system, and it's $2 million. Rather than granting them $2 million, one thing you could do is a smaller amount over the 20 years to help offset the lease. And so that's where they say, hey, in addition, and it's less money for the state to have to come up with in a single year. And it could contribute to, with the energy savings toward helping pay for that. That's just a.
Representative Buss?
Thank you. You mentioned that, well, first of all, what are most payback times? Is it
So, and this is across the board. So lighting, and we're talking schools, lighting, we typically see 5 to 7 or 8 years. And the reason for that is if you put those same lights in a hotel where they're on 24/7, that payback's going to be 1 to 2 years. When you're in a school that only runs 2,000 hours a year, that you tend to be in that long single digit. The boiler upgrades, it depends on what fuel you're going from and to. So like in Virgins, we were going from oil to natural gas. And so that payback was under 10 years. We typically see 10 to 15 years in boilers. And the controls, it depends on where you're coming from and to. One of the other big talking points has been electrification. And we could almost have a whole separate meeting on that. One of the problems that we run into with electrification in schools, and let's just talk about the Marion Cross School in Norwich. So that school right now, it has oil steam boiler and ventilation with no cooling. So if you were to add in electrification there, it would probably push you to something like geothermal or heat pumps, which have air conditioning. And even though it's efficient air conditioning, it means you're adding a whole new electrical usage because they're currently not air conditioned in the school at all. So it's this weird thing that when you electrify a school, sometimes you actually significantly increase the amount of energy that the school uses.
because you're adding a new
Because
service?
you're adding a new service.
Right. But do you have experience with the geothermal heat pumps?
Yes.
What do you think about them? If it's a new construction.
If it's new construction, it makes a lot of sense if you need cooling. The one thing I caution everybody on is, so in general, geothermal systems work really well when there's a balanced load, when you use them for heating. And then you also, because you're basically rejecting the heat in the warm months and you're using that heat in the cold months. So you want to be able to have that push and pull. The places that don't like geothermal is when they don't really need the air conditioning. So if you're going to shut your school down in July and August and lock the doors, you don't want geothermal because you're essentially only using it in the winter, and you end up essentially changing the geological chemistry outside and raising the temperature of the earth in that spot and overheating the wells or cooling the wells.
So would you say, as we look ahead, if we're going to do in this state major renovations on 10 high schools in the next 10 years, are we still going to be married to fossil fuels?
An overwhelming majority of the high schools I've seen use wood heat. And so and I know that has some political pros and cons to it, but, Bennington, Springfield, the Northeast Kingdom, all the high schools I've been down in those regions use wood heat. So they're not fossil fuels, and wood is very, very cheap. So, whereas it might, when Virgins was on oil, it might have cost $200,000 or $300,000 to heat that school. You can heat the schools in Bennington for about $30,000 a year with wood heat. So the question is wood heat a sustainable part of the equation or not? And I know there's different viewpoints on that.
Would he still eligible for a significant state contribution, or has that gone? It used to be 90%.
Yeah, that's to my knowledge. So there are some Efficiency Vermont programs that will give limited, like 50 to 100,000 for wood, but those days of 100% paying are gone. Yeah.
And how long do those systems last? What's their life?
30 years for the wood heat systems.
Okay, let me just ask my question again. If we take wood heat out of the equation,
Yes.
are we married to fossil fuels for the foreseeable future because we just don't have the technology to replace them to heat a large?
I think it's part of it. Fossil fuels are part of it, unless you want to make that significant investment for geothermal. And there are other people that will tell you that heat pumps are panacea. The only thing, and I like heat pumps and they have their right spot, but when it's negative 20 out and you still want to hold school, the heat pumps really do get very hard to run ventilation when it's negative 20 out, even their own literature will. And so the northern Vermont climates that are going to see those temperatures that we saw, the way you could do an all heat pump building is with backup electric heat. And so you can do it. It's just, there's going to be you need a backup. The other thing, and so I'm a little bit of a fan of, if you want to use that electrification, but you have a building that has a boiler, keep that boiler as a backup, and don't make the 90% solution with the couple day backup the enemy of the, it's kind of a moderate approach, but just say, hey, we're gonna offset 95% of our fossil fuel use, and when it's negative 20 out, we might run the oil boiler or something.
Do you charge a fee for your annual contract where you come back and explain the energy savings?
It's built into the initial fee. It's called the measurement and verification, and it's built into the initial contract.
And when you go and evaluate buildings, like, so as we look at all of our inventory and you were stating that it's important for you to be in that conversation about when it's best to save the building and when it's time.
Yep.
Is that something that you feel like you would have to be in each building to assess? And,
yes.
Yeah. And is there capacity for your?
I mean, not to do every school at once. But so Vermont, there's a very clear process that schools can use to engage us in the Vermont law. They have to do an RFP. They have to advertise it publicly. And so when we get, the districts that are interested in our services probably should issue an RFP. And there are other companies like Johnson Controls, Honeywell, and Siemens, bigger companies that do similar things that we do.
And do you charge a fee for that initial evaluation, or?
It varies, not typically. If we think that a district wants to really do projects, if it seems like it's just we want a report that can sit on a shelf in the boiler room, we kind of get a sense of how real it is. Because I will tell you, when I first got into this industry in 2008, there was a ton of federal money floating around to do energy audits, and almost every school in Vermont and New Hampshire had an energy audit done from 2008 to 2012. But it was free, it was paid for by the federal government. And so what I learned was, when you just give that away, it's really not valued, because you're just and there was no path on a lot of times to take that free federal audit and actually, okay, well, who's a contractor that's going to do this work, and who's going to talk to the school board about it? And so where we fill the gap is, we want to work with districts that want to improve their buildings, and will go to the select board, to the school board, to the voters, and kind of guide through the process, and then oversee the work. Yep.
So is your business model essentially doing almost exclusively performance contracting?
That's about 90% of what we do, yeah. Yeah.
And you say that most of the high schools you've been in are actually wood heat.
Yeah.
This is wood chip as opposed to wood pellet?
Yeah, so an overwhelming amount of the Vermont high schools I see are wood chip. You see a lot of elementary schools. So if you're coming up 89, you can see the Sharon Elementary School. They have a big pellet silo. So what I see is outside of the natural gas pipelines, you tend to see wood heat, and with high schools being wood chip, elementary schools being pellet. And what that was driven by is state funding back in the early 2000s. So they basically at the time were saying 80 to 90% of the installed cost, and it was really a no-brainer at that time. The one thing I will say, a lot of these systems went in 90s to 2008, and then the last 30 years, what that means is we're 5 to 10 years away from needing to replace all of those. So just.
Yeah, and that's what I'm curious about, is do you have a sense of, do they regret having done wood heat? And B, are they going to stick with wood heat once that 30 years comes up?
Well, it depends on who you ask in the community. If you're saying, I went to one of the high schools in the Northeast Kingdom area, and I looked at their energy bills, and they were spending like $25,000 to heat this high school. And it's like none of the energy efficiency stuff I typically, because you said, what's your payback? And I'm like, in this school, you're paying so little compared to what it costs to heat, let's say, Virgins High School. It's like, you can keep your windows open. I mean, that wood heat is so cheap, especially if you're pulling it from a local forest area, that nothing competes with it on. So from how much you're spending on energy, it's great. From someone like me who's trying to come in and save energy and justify it with a payback, it's really hard to do.
Yeah, I mean, so just all I've heard anecdotally is that they can be troublesome mechanisms. They're just sort of in a way cruder than what you do with oil and gas.
So they're so cheap, but they're a labor of love.
Yeah.
So you have to, yeah, that's right. If you have the staff that can get excited about wood heat and you get excited about the savings, it's a great technology. It is local fuel. There's a whole emissions conversation you can have as a separate meeting.
Yes.
Great. Well, thanks very much for your
Thank you
time.
very much.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thanks.
And educational, everybody talks about performance contracting as a panacea in many ways, and it's just good to learn a little bit more about it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You do work in Woodstock with our town.
Yes, we do. We're electrifying Woodstock right now.
Yes.
That's right. Thank you.
All right, folks, another little jump here, and we're going to go back into our discussion about approved independent schools. And we're really, there were some questions about sort of the relationship between local education agencies, supervisory unions, and students who are on special ed or IEPs and the services that they receive in an approved independent school, in a private school. So today we've got folks from Burton Academy and St. Johnsbury Academy who are going to talk to us a little bit about that. And it's also a good opportunity for us to ask questions about sort of how that works on a day-to-day basis. So please come and join us. Hopefully there are a couple of seats up there.
Let's take the company one.
Welcome to you both. We've been sort of taking a deep dive into Act 173, what it means starting July 1st, how it worked, how special education relationships work today. And we're happy to have you here to kind of give us your point of view from the approved independent school side. So if you just wouldn't mind introducing yourselves and proceed with your presentation.
Sure. So my name's Meg Kenny. I am in my 25th year at Burton Academy, but my career started prior to that. I taught for 5 years. I went to St. Michael's College as an undergrad, got an economics major there, and then went back to the grad program and became a teacher and started my career at the Shelburne Community School as a middle school humanities, English language arts teacher. And then I moved to Southern Vermont and taught for a few years at Manchester Elementary Middle School, also as a middle school ELA humanities teacher, and then took a position at teaching at Burton, English and social studies. Was a teacher for a number of years and then took on greater leadership responsibility as a department head and continued to teach and serve in that position, and then shifted into the dean of faculty, which oversaw all professional development of our faculty and in evaluation of our teachers, and also taught part-time with that position. And then 10 years ago, moved into the associate head of school role, which really oversees the daily operations of the school, all, people and programs, sort of how I talk about it. So.
Let me just ask, would you just give us a quick, Burton is located where?
Yep, so Burton is, sure.
Communities.
Yep. So Burton is located in Manchester, Vermont. It's been in existence since 1829. It's a proud pillar of the community. I will say that my in-laws attended there. I think their parents attended Burton. My husband attended there, my two sons. It is seen as like a rite of passage for Manchester, and then the 12 surrounding towns that are considered sending towns. And then beyond that, we have students who grow up in choice towns, also towns that don't operate a high school. In those towns, there's 8 other, and those students can have Burton as an option. Those students receive the state average tuition, and students from the 13 sending towns, those towns vote to accept BBA's tuition, and they pay that full tuition. We operate 9 through 12. Some people think, are you 7 through 12? We're 9 through 12. We have a full range of programming. We serve students all the way with intellectual disabilities, autism spectrum disorder, all the way through students who are going off to 2- and 4-year colleges. Our programs are robust. We meet the needs of all kids through our core academic program, really focusing on really spending a lot of time on multi-tiered systems of support and that tier 1 instruction for all kids. What are we seeing as the critical skills that we guarantee for all kids, and then provide the interventions there at that teacher level, and then move to additional interventions based on students' needs. So that sort of just gives you an overview. I'm happy to take any questions, but we'll turn it over to Matt.
Would you like me to?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
I'm Dr. Matt Forrest. I'm currently the Director of Special Services at St. Johnsbury Academy. I've been in education for 25 years at this point, 21 years in public school. Started off as a guidance counselor, then a crisis counselor in public high schools, vice principal, superintendent in Vermont. I'm dual certified in Vermont and New Hampshire as a school counselor, superintendent, principal, and director of special services. I also have 2 children that are dyslexic, and I've been on that side as a parent. I don't usually advertise this, but I do have dyslexia and was a student at St. Johnsbury Academy and got services there. So I hope that I can provide a unique lens and answer some questions today.
I'll also add that Burton has 775 students currently, and I think we have 102 on IEPs and another 57 on 504 plans, which don't fall under, that's general ed, but just to give you a sense of the range of needs students we serve.
What's the grade? You might have said this in this, but at the same
I did 9 through 12.
time.
Yeah, and it's a public and boarding school. We have 26 districts that send to us, and then we have about 200 students in a boarding school.
Did you say 26 districts?
Yes.
Sorry, that was a direct.
Oh, there's a background document. What's that? Yeah, we work with, so through my office, we work with 18 LEAs. And do that.
Due to consolidation, I think we had greater consolidation in Southern Vermont, so we work with 5 LEAs.
Probably way more than that.
Prior to consolidate, yeah. And most of our students come from the Bennington Rutland Supervisory Union. So I would say most of our contact, daily contact with the LEA from that supervisory union.
And just a reminder to the committee, St. Johnsbury and BBA, along with Thetford and Lindenville, are the 4 schools that we generally refer to as the town or historic academies that have, basically had a been historically used as the high school, public high school for students from those areas. Now, do you have more to present?
Well, I could give a brief overview just of our special services program, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about it.
Okay. Yep. So we at Burton, we have a range of specialized programs that serve a diverse, first of all, we take all kids. We have an open admissions policy. I wouldn't even call it an admissions policy. Students register from any of those sending towns. We certainly do outreach and welcome our 8th graders in as 9th graders, and that starts a year before they come with visits to their sending schools, and just like any public school would do in terms of orienting a kid to the school. But once students are there, we're able, they access, our regular course offerings in our course of study. And then students who have already been identified on an IEP, before a kid would arrive on BBA's campus, there'd be a transition meeting with folks from our our special services department meeting with folks from the sending town special services department, and the LEAs would be involved in those meetings. And, there might be adjustments to IEPs at that point because there is a yearly review and IEPs are updated based on students' progress, but also entering that new school. So based on the services we provide. At that time, then students would enter into school. All of our students have access to the general education program and then are supported in other ways. So a student on an IEP who needs services in, say, speech and language or ELA, math, they would get supported in two ways. I'm just talking kind of like in the general sense. Most of our students would be supported this way. They'd have a regular course schedule. They might have anywhere from 2, 3, or 5 blocks throughout the week where they would meet with a special educator to work on their IEP goals. Other students might work on, receive their services in a more integrated way where in a team taught situation where a special educator is teaming with a math teacher or an ELA teacher, and those services would be a part of what happens in their regular ed, say humanities class or algebra 1 class, and then another way students get services is they might be attending a specialized program that we offer. So we have about 22 students who are in what we call our access program, and that's staffed by behaviorists, learning specialists, support services from speech and language, paraeducators. And that program is really providing community, life skills, employment, really working toward, some of these students might be with us till they're 22 years old and receive that specialized programming for greater independence in their adult life. So, we coordinate a lot. That program is coordinating a lot with Higher Ability, other outside agencies, mental health agencies to support our students in that program. They also all access other programs at school. So where they can, they might be involved in, unified PE. They might be taking elective courses. They might be involved in general ed academics with support. And then we also have another program called our Target program, which really captures kids who are struggling on our main campus and maybe encountered some kind of barrier where they might be at risk to drop out, or their engagement, they're not able to access their learning on the main campus. And then we're able to put in more specialized programs for them, which might involve staying on campus for some academics, some electives, attending Southwest Tech, taking a dual enrollment, an internship in the community, and as where those programs would also be available to all kids. But that's sort of the range of services. We've also added 10 years ago, this is the 10th anniversary of our Student Success Program, which again, a lot of collaboration with our sending towns to identify students who are first generation college bound, maybe have some other vulnerability that might get in the way of them being able to access their education, whether it's a family situation or they're even just moved to the area. And that program starts with a 3-week summer program to orient kids and to build goals, aspirations for their future. They even get on college campuses. They do their summer reading. They meet teachers and really trying to, start from a point of success when they walk on campus for their first day of 9th grade. So that's kind of an overview. I will just say one thing. I think it's important to note that our Director of Special Services is in daily contact with the BRSU LEA and other LEAs as required, and they have a standing meeting, and that's really a collaborative team. So we follow all the same rules that public schools follow in terms of special ed rules. It's that IEP process is a team process is successful with that collaboration from the LEA and the school.
You want to give us a kind of an overview of the St. Johnsbury situation?
Sure. I guess I'd like to start with teacher training and then what we're doing to train teachers to meet the needs of the students that we're serving. So 4 years ago, when I came aboard at the academy, there was 76% of the student population that we were serving in special services had a reading or writing disability. And we didn't really have, and we were seeing that general special educators coming out of either a bachelor's level or a master's level program really weren't trained in a specific, how to teach literacy or really not comfortable with math. So what we've done is we've trained the entire special services department, including paraeducators, in the Orton Gillingham method, which is the #1 method in treating students with dyslexia. We also, when we were doing that, we recognized, when I tried to start it at first, there was a 2-year waiting list. And we saw that there was other districts that were interested in that training but couldn't get it. We're now providing our 3rd Orton Gillingham training for the region. We offered a full year training last year, offered another one this summer, last summer, and we're offering it again this summer, and we're offering it at cost. The Academy's not making any money on it. We're just charging the fee for the instructor to come in. So that's a 2-week, 60-hour graduate level training. So the reason we did it is that we wanted to have a consistent language when we're talking about literacy interventions, that we're having a consistent language when we're talking about setting goals for literacy. And what we've seen, we did pilot an Orton Gillingham English class where we now have those kids there where we started off in their 9th grade year in an IS, more intensive English class, moving out of that class into standard and accelerated classes into their junior, senior year. So what we're finding is if you provide that intense intervention at 9, 10, they can't transition into upper level classes in the 11th, 12th year. We've had 7 students this last semester transition off IEPs, which is a savings to districts. Right. So what we're finding is consistency with service delivery is key, and having everybody trained in a specific method is important. We do meet with the LEAs, myself and the assistant director, bi-weekly to check in and make sure that just to see how things are going. So those occur. There's constant communication with the LEAs, and again, in collaboration in offering these trainings. So that piece is there. What we find as a challenge is the inconsistency from service delivery from throughout the districts. And this, when I attended a meeting with the district AOEs, the AOE facilitated the discussion, and that seemed to be consistent through that discussion. But discrepancies within systems of how, for example, they may have an OG instructor, then that OG instructor leaves, and then there's no one to provide it. So a student has that inconsistent approach to that literacy piece that they're getting. So our goal is to provide that consistency and having everybody trained coming through. We provide a wide gamut of services, from students that are have an intellectual disability and are functioning at 2nd, 3rd grade reading level, and have a life skills program that we're creating for that, and up into students that are in accelerated classes that once you remove that text barrier, they can comprehend everything. So it's really adapting to the needs that the students have and moving them forward.
And St. Johnsbury is also the same sort of open admissions. Students really just register. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Regardless of, can you talk about how the relationship between the LEA and your schools might look different than a relationship between the LEA and the high school, the public high school that it's attached to, and it may not be different at all, or it may be different in some way?
I think, we follow the same rules that the public schools follow in terms of special ed that's set out by the Agency of Education. And so I think the relationships are probably very similar, and the IEP process is the same as a public school. So in terms of all of the same, rights for parents and identifying an issue and what's the data you've collected to what interventions have you tried? Are you ready? Is there going to be additional testing? Is the LEA on board for that testing to take place? And then when the IEP, we discovered a little different processes at both schools. Our learning specialists actually write the draft IEP, and then it's brought to the meeting, and the LEA, confirms and agrees. And so it's more of a collaborative process, where at St. Johnsbury, their LEAs all write the IEPs.
But it's still collaborative.
Yeah.
It's done as a team.
So I don't know how that works in a public school, if the learning specialist is writing the IEP or the LEA is writing the IEP. But, the services that are agreed upon for each student based on their needs, I mean, it's the LEA is in full agreement, and that service page and those goals are really important to then drive what happens with the student at VBA.
Can you quantify in any way? And I'm just, maybe you can't, I'm just thinking, it's always ultimately the LEA's responsibility to make sure that the
Correct.
student on IEP receives services. And so in how many cases is it the LEA that's in charge of essentially bringing people onto your campus to provide services as opposed to you taking charge of making sure?
Yeah, so for us, we contract, the LEAs are in most cases responsible for the psychological testing. We often do all the achievement testing. There might be somebody coming to our campus to test students from say the BRSU or another sending district. And then, but we provide all the services. We have everybody on staff. The only sort of service provider we contract with would be an OT. We have about 60% time OT, but that's a contract. But all of those services are provided by us, speech and language, BCBAs, special educators, EL, English language learners.
And then when you sort of, let's say, provide services that exceed what might be your tuition, then you work sort of within the reimbursement model.
Correct. There would be a bill back model. Yep, correct. Yep. And then we actually have a pretty, you should know that we're required by the AOE as an independent school, and I do not believe that public schools are required to do this, but you could think of this almost like a medical billing model. Every day, our learning specialists or any provider is documenting the service they provided, the amount of time they spent. And it's a big lift administratively for our folks every single day to be keeping track every student they meet with, where I believe in the public schools, twice a year, they provide schedules of how services work, student schedules to show how they're delivering that service.
I'm not sure that that's actually, I think that there's a fair bit of bean counting currently.
At every school.
At a public school, but of course under ACTS, through the hope is that will
Go.
significantly go. But I'm correct in saying that the independent schools won't have that same, won't be working under the same system.
So speech and language services are provided, the district provides someone on campus and for occupational therapy as well. We just this year started providing educational testing. So we've had families that had concerns about their children. So we offer a wide berth of testing and screenings to give families an idea of what they're struggling with. And that's the first year we've done that. And that's, as I said, no charge to families. The other thing that we offer, I just want to make sure I hit on this, is we do have a full MTSS model in place, and we have an Orton Gillingham reading and writing lab on campus that's open to every student on campus, and is staffed by a reading and writing specialist that is a trained Orton Gillingham instructor and a speech and language pathologist that's on staff. There's also an Orton Gillingham instructor, and that's open to everyone.
I've asked enough questions. Representative Austin?
Yep, I just want to, just two questions and then I have another question. Just your tuition for tuition students, how much is that? How much do you charge?
Get the exact number, I wrote it down, so So we have two different, for students who come from our sending towns, that tuition is $22,487. That's the 23-24 cost. That's for next year. And for students who come from a town that, they're a choice town and they pay the state average, and then they would be required to pay the difference. And there is also a financial aid model that can support students in need. They apply for that. And then we charge we have a few students from out of district, like we actually tuition in some students from Cambridge, New York, from Arlington, Vermont, who don't fit either one of those. And they pay a higher tuition.
You're just looking for the day tuition for general ed.
Yeah.
So I can only speak to a bit of this because some of it's outside of my area, but the day tuition right now is $2,855.
20,000.
20,000. Did I say two?
Yeah.
That's a good deal.
We're going there.
20,000. Yeah, that's fantastic. It's a bargain.
So I just want to go back to the literacy assessment. You're 9 through 12, right?
Yeah.
So that means kids are coming into St. Johnsbury with a variety of proficiencies in literacy.
Yeah.
So do you look at them as special ed students, or do you look at them as students who haven't had this instruction?
I would say both. I think you have some students that may have fallen through the cracks that are solid, maybe B, A students with strong work ethic that have compensated and but they're putting an awful lot of time in, and their reading fluency and decoding skills are really poor. And their parents have just been, because when you get to that tier 3 of special ed, and do you need specialized instruction? The question might be no, but it doesn't mean that they wouldn't benefit from some OG or something to help them move forward. And then we've seen in special services, depending on again, sometimes there's just discrepancies depending on the resources the districts have or the personnel that they have to provide the services. Kids come in with a variety of different needs. So our approach has been to get all of our teachers trained and provide a consistent approach to literacy instruction. And we're seeing results with that.
You're seeing good.
We are. So right now we're using AIMSweb and STAR assessments to progress monitor. This is our first year with AIMSweb. We piloted a different program for the last 2 years and it didn't work well. So right now what we're doing is we're progress monitoring every 2 weeks. We review the data. So if we can catch a kid that is flatlined or regressed, then we can make a change in academic progress. But what we don't want is to get to a point where we're not catching that, right? So as soon as that flat line or regression happens, then we meet as a team and then we make an instructional change. So we have a student support team that meets every Thursday to review students at risk or noticing a drop in academic performance. And then we have an MTSS committee that meets bi-weekly just to review the MTSS structure and system in place to make sure it's functioning the way it should. And we've got a ways to go. We're building the data infrastructure. We're looking at how to track success of those interventions at tier 1 to make sure that they're working. But we've got a variety of interventions at tier 1 and tier 2. It's just got to keep moving and keep working on it.
Sounds like that.
And I would say Burton-Burton's is similar. We have what we call our Care for At-Risk Students Committee that meets Thursday, and that's made up of, school counselors, special educators, health and wellness clinicians, dean of students office, and we're looking at, discipline data, attendance data, academic data, and then through that, short-term interventions are made, and then we're really focusing on building our capacity at BBA around that tier 1 instruction, using that, teaching and formative assessment to then drive the next teaching point and provide interventions for students who aren't meeting the goal for that particular area.
Okay, add one thing. One other thing in addition to the tier 1 supports is the MTSS committee last year, we adopted universal accommodations. And the purpose of this was to empower teachers to make decisions in the classroom. So they didn't have to have a meeting or a 504, but that they could just look at this and say, I can do this. I don't need to ask permission to do it. So these are universal accommodations that any student can have on campus. I got caught, if it's okay to pass them around.
We also, in terms of our CARS team, if a teacher makes a referral, they go on and there's a universal accommodations right there in the form. I've already tried this, I've tried this, this happened, this is the data I collected. So then all that goes to that committee.
Representative Williams has a question.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Forrest, I love saying that. Yeah. I watched him grow up. So. Do you ever see patterns from schools, specific schools, that you can say that school needs some assistance from us to steer the boat to help?
I do. I don't know about. I want to be careful how I answer that. Yeah. But I do think the academy is in a unique position because of that lens, right? Because you have so many sending schools and you can see the students coming up and what's occurring. Right. So the goal is like the OG training that we're offering. That's really an outreach to local. We want to be able to offer a service within the region. So we're all working on the same thing and talking the same language around literacy so that we're providing the same service. So when those kids are coming up, it's a carryover. right? It's a continuation of those services. So I think some of it is a turnover in staffing, and I think some of it, I don't know if this is current, but I do recall the average turnover for principals and superintendents was about 2.3 years nationally. So when you have that kind of turnover, it does impact the systems and the planning. So I think everybody's doing the best they can with the best intentions, but when you have a chronic turnover in systems and difficulties in certain regions in hiring, that's going to create discrepancies.
Thank you.
I see MTSS as a really powerful opportunity for greater collaboration between BBA and our sending towns, just in terms of, the data we receive from sending towns, like where kids are at, so that we can quickly intervene, right, when students arrive. And I just think as schools really adopt this model of getting very clear on what matters most and really using the teaching and assessing cycle, like we're just going to see great gains in students in all schools, and so when we have kids come from, 13 schools, I really strongly believe we never know, like, oh, you came from MEMS, you came from Floodbrook, like based on their skills. That's not kids. We're getting all kinds of kids from every school. So it's hard. Well, and it's okay. Yeah, and I think it's good that we see strengths. All students have strengths. We'd like to identify them, and we like to help them improve from where they're at.
I think that, sorry.
Go ahead.
I think one thing that we, just as all schools, right, that we know how to teach literacy. We know how to teach reading. We have to work together to provide it, mm-hmm. right? And when we can get on the same page for that, I think kids are going to benefit. But it's not a mystery. Right? We know Orton Gilling it's got 80 years of practice and it produces results. So if we can, work together on providing that service, I think we're going to make good gains. I do worry about inconsistencies. When we're getting, for any high school, whether it's public or private, to get students at 9th grade that are at a 4th or 5th grade reading level, you've got to decipher it first, right? Is it an instructional deficit? Right, because if it's an instructional deficit, you're going to be able to provide some instructional practices, and the kid's going to make some quick gains, or is it more organic? And I think what we do see at times is some instructional gaps opposed to the disability, and sometimes, it's those stereotypes that the disability, that the adult's perception of the disability is more debilitating than the disability itself. So breaking through that and challenging the students and providing them what they need. Thing that as a whole system, we've got to work towards.
Representative Stone.
Hey, Dr. Forrest, do you have the numbers on St. Johnsbury, like how many children are on 504s?
Yeah. So we have 48 students in our guided studies program, 20 students in our IS program, and 87 students on 504s.
The first three were all IEP programs?
Yes. Yep. A total of 155 students within our special services program.
Sorry, go on.
Just something to be mindful of too is like some of our classes, right? Like just a student that might take an IS math might be in a standard or accelerated English, right? It doesn't, just because they have a deficit in one area doesn't mean they're on this one track. And I think we just got to be mindful of those things, that they have a learning challenge in a specific area. They're missing that. It doesn't mean they're in one track to stay there. And we have students that are on 504s that are getting an Orton Gillingham intervention, even though it's not special ed, because they need it. And we offer that after school 4 days a week in our reading and writing lab.
And then do you have the percentage of how many students within the special services programs are mainstreamed in each of your respective schools?
They're all mainstream.
All mainstreamed, okay.
I actually want to clarify that. They're all mainstreamed, up to a point. Like we have one or two students who, do adapt like a unified PE, but other than that, wouldn't be able to access their learning other than through specialized instruction.
Yeah, I would say similar. We might have a student that's in an IS math and taking, culinary and other other classes. So it's a variety of, but they're all taking some mainstream classes.
If either of you run into, with today's current workforce shortage, you know, an IEP requires a certain service and you can't find the people to do it, and therefore you have to tell the LEA, we can't accept the student?
Yes and no. Yes, we run into that challenge. No, we never do not accept the student because of that. So the area that we've seen is paraeducators. But we will accept the student and then we either get a sub or find someone that can provide it internally as we're collaborating with the district to hire someone. So what we've done, because it's been such a problem over the last few years for paraeducators, we've helped advertise on our website, which we haven't traditionally done, in trying to hire. So it's never, for us, it hasn't been, no, you can't come. It's, yes, you can come and let's figure out how we can do this and work together to get the supports you need.
And I would say it's both and for us. Is that there have been times, very few times, where if we didn't have a program that would meet the needs of that student, and that would basically be somebody who needed a lot of clinical oversight in terms of maybe their, you know, the potential to harm themselves, harm somebody else, and would need that constant monitoring and pivoting of program. We don't offer that kind of clinical oversight, that milieu for just like many public schools don't offer that. So I don't think, we wouldn't say we're not going to hire somebody to do that because we don't offer that program. But we haven't run into a case where we have a program that would suit the student's need. And if we needed another para, we would still take the student and figure it out as well.
And do your schools inquire about disability status before admission? Is that part of your pre-admission process, is to inquire about disability status or no?
No.
I don't think so.
It changed.
Yeah.
There was a question on there and it's been removed. It was never a decision-making factor.
Representative Buss?
How long has your Orton Gillingham program been up? And if it's been up long enough, are you seeing less kids on IEPs due to the program?
So it's fairly new. So I've been there 4 years and we trained the entire staff last year. So this is the second year of it running. But we did run that pilot program, and that had 7 students in it that were selected because the data showed that model would support their needs, and those students showed significant growth. But we also had 2 instructors in there. We really wanted to kind of. Right now, this is what's happening. We did the training. Everybody went through the training. Now we have that same instructor that was working with us last year. She's coming on campus and helping us integrate what she taught us into the classroom setting. So into the IS content courses where we're, you know, the English classes and the history classes, of taking that approach, the OG approach, and breaking down syllables and carrying it over into the classroom setting. So they're getting a double dose on top of the intervention that they're getting. So the goal is to kind of keep that progressing and going forward. And we also had 4 general ed teachers in our school also take part in that training.
Well,
This is sort of a different question, but can you talk about how you work with kids that need a lot of behavior intervention and mental health?
Sure. So, again, a part of our MTSS process, we've identified sort of dispositions for learning and expectations for behavior to maintain the climate and sort of norms of the school. And like just right now, we have a small number of students who are engaged who we've tried like the normal classroom accommodations, behavior plans, maybe a functional behavior assessment with recommendations to the teacher, helping a teacher build the climate and to support the teacher in developing the right positive climate for all kids in the classroom, preferential seating, whatever those classroom accommodations. And so we've moved from that with a few students who are now in a 4-week series of direct instruction on on how to manage their anger, what's happening to their body. So it's a collaboration between our mental health clinicians, our dean's office, some classroom teachers around conflict resolution. So small groups. So what we've determined, we thought we were going to start with groups of 4. We're actually doing it with groups of 2. And that's allowed the students to kind of open up and kind of get to like, yes, when I feel this is sort of my learned behavior, that this is what I do when I get this feeling happening in my body, and trying to redirect that to build in other skills so they can be successful and manage in the classroom, regulate, like those regulation skills.
I'm going to respond.
Sure.
I would say similar, where we collaborate with our mental health counselors. We get a staff of them, and collaboration with them, the deans, the special ed case manager, and the classroom teachers. A lot of times it's a lot of work with the classroom teachers on, my constant feedback is you got to show them you care, even when they might deserve it the least, especially with the oppositional defiant student that's just testing you. But once you get to that point, there's usually a pivot point where it switches. But again, it's just a lot of collaboration with the therapists, the counselors that they're working with on campus, our staff, and getting through that. The only, and touched on this, the only students that we really can't serve are the students that don't come to school. And the ones that are violent. And that's, in my experience in public schools, that was the same scenario, that if the student's a threat to themselves or others, there's a need for a different setting. And if they don't come to school, then we really work with the LEAs, and it's never a hard no. It's usually we meet, we put a plan in place, we set a 2-week deadline to kind of come back, and we meet. So there's never like a set date. It's always really individual and specific to that kid. But we're seeing a lot of students with anxiety and trying to work through that. So sometimes it's letting them come in at 10 and starting at a very different day, and then increasing the day for them as it goes and they become more comfortable getting on campus, and working through those types of pieces with them.
And we take the exact same approach at BVA. We have, modified schedules, or accessing one course through VLC and then coming to campus for a couple, and then maybe an early departure, and working on the anxiety. Like, that's always a piece of it. What services can we provide on campus? Referrals to outside therapists. Occasionally somebody might go away to a more intense treatment, and then with that goal of returning back. And then that would be a family decision, and then return back to BVA with stronger skills to manage that.
Representative Brady.
If there's a behavioral incident that is severe, and you're in a situation of suspension or expulsion, what does that process look like for a student and their family if it's a out of school placement temporarily, or if there's even a move maybe?
So through the IEP process, a student on an IEP, because that's a very...
That's true, but I guess both, but...
Okay, so a student on an IEP, we would very much follow, in terms they can't be out of school more than 10 days, is it a manifestation of their disability, like all of those procedures are in place and are followed. I would say Burton is the few cases we've had where a student maybe has gone to an alternative placement, whether it be like the tutorial center to finish the semester after a severe discipline incident. The goal is always to have them back. So it's like we need some separate. We are a 3rd, 4th, 5th chance school. Like, it wouldn't happen on the first offense anyway, unless it was violent towards somebody, or an assault. We're talking really severe, and I can't even think of one in the time I've been there. But, if we had repeated AOD violations or dealing drugs on campus, there might be a separation for a period of time where we would provide their education through the tutorial center in Manchester, and then invite them back to come back at the start of the next semester.
Yeah, so the ones that I've been involved with at the academy, it hasn't been an expulsion. It's been a very simple process that there's been ongoing communication with the LEAs when there's been an issue. And then again, it's putting a plan in place, a behavior plan in place, trying to target the behavior and then teach the replacement behavior, and then set a time frame where we're going to meet and address that. The couple cases I've been involved in, it is because the student was becoming aggressive and was nonverbal, and it really needed more than what we could provide, and everybody on, the parent, the district, everybody was on the same page. But it was also an open invitation to come back when his needs had been met, so that the door was not shut.
And then in terms of a student on an IEP who maybe there's a question as to whether Burton is the right placement. I mean, there is, again, a long process of, going from least restrictive to more restrictive. And then again, the LEA fully involved in that. So there would never be a decision to do a change of placement that wasn't coming with the LEA's support and guidance. And I can think of one student this year who is in a more therapeutic setting with the goal of coming back. And the goals are really clear. These are the things this is what you need to be demonstrating in order to come back and try again to be successful.
Will the sort of the kicking in of everything on Act 173, is it going to change anything, or are you already sort of there?
I would say we are working to get there, and the big change is going to be in terms of the special ed referrals, like having the data from the tier 2 interventions to show that we've tried this in terms of this worked, this didn't. We need more. We need to know more and do that special ed referral after that robust process has happened. I would say our process is developing, and I hope this time next year I could come in here and say it's robust.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we're headed in a really good direction. I think I think there's going to have to be a big focus on classroom instruction and providing teachers support. So what are teachers going to be expected to bring to the table when they come in? And like for us, when you're working with multiple LEAs, so I just reached out to a few districts because I worry that there's going to be multiple different expectations from different districts. And I really want to try to reel it in and get us all on the same page of what the expectation is going to be, so that we can kind of deliver a unified message to our teachers. So if they're going to try an intervention, what data are they going to request us to bring and show that it either worked or didn't work, and are they going to accept that for?
And we're in the same place with those conversations with our sending districts as well, because we want to make sure we're collecting the data that they're going to say, yes, this is research-based, has fidelity, and meet all those requirements.
So on January 12th, we provided a training to the entire faculty to start the core instructional discussions about what that's going to look like. So we're just going to continue to move forward in that. But I feel we're headed in a real good direction. And the structure, the MTSS structure is in place. It's not perfect, and we got to work on some things, but there's a lot of energy around it. And I just want to, I know you brought up the communication between the LEAs, and I just want to kind of hit on that because I feel there's a lot of communication between us and the LEAs. It goes through the weekends. We text each other back and forth. There's more with some districts than other districts, but it's current. It's there. I never feel like I can't communicate with them, and I would hope that by the amount of communication coming back from them, I feel that that's there. We do have, like, for absenteeism, we have a policy in place where at 4 absences, the dean of students meets with the student, and a letter goes to the district, the special ed director or the LEA. At 7 absences, another letter goes to the family and the LEA or the special ed director, and at 10 days, it triggers an IEP meeting. So there's constant communication going back and forth to the districts. I can't speak to what the communication is within the district, but I can tell you that it's coming from us to them.
Can you talk at all about, on that topic, sort of outside of the special ed world, what we've had superintendents comment to us is we send our students off to these, 4 or 5 or 13 different schools. If they're in a sending district, and then we sort of lose track of them. Everything from, academic progress year to year or quarter to quarter, right up to and including absences. So I guess I'd be curious to know to your school's sort of reporting policies or your relationship with LEAs for the non-IEP students.
So I can speak as a former superintendent and working with the academy. That at that time, Tom Levitt would meet with me regularly and talk about student progress. And I reached out to him and he welcomed it. And I also know at that time, he was meeting with 2 other superintendents on a regular basis. So I always found that in that role, very open and welcoming. I've just recently reached out to the district, asked for SBAC and STAR data, our current 9th grade classes, and the superintendents that I talked to and the special ed directors were very gracious in providing that information. So I couldn't speak to how it all is now, but my experience at that time was it was very open.
Is there a more structured policy aside from I get together with the superintendent and we talk? I mean,
At Burn,
like reporting grades, reporting absences, that sort of.
At Burn, we don't have a formal system. We certainly, Randy Lowe and I have a relationship and we talk and meet regularly, but I give her whatever she asks for. And if that was something that they wanted, we'd be happy to provide it to them.
For example, absences.
Yes.
I mean, they're ultimately the truant officer.
Correct. So we have like similar policy through our CARS team where we monitor attendance and we would get an LEA involved, or if it's a non-special ed student, I would sometimes reach out to the superintendent and say, we share families. So if we have a kid in high school, there's likely students in elementary school and they're having the same issue with, and how do we work together, and wellness checks and affidavits to the state's attorney. But we really try to keep that local and work with the family to figure out what's the barrier to get the kid to school in the few instances that happens.
So with attendance, the same process that I described to you for special services is in place, but it's sent to the superintendent's office for gen ed students. Outside of that, I would have to defer to the headmaster because I'm not, as far as grades reporting and stuff like that, that's not something I'm involved in.
They've asked, Randy Coolis has asked for our SBAC data, Randy Lowe, and we're happy to give that to her in disaggregated form and whatever. So everything they've asked for, we've provided.
I think probably, I'm going to make an assumption. I think finding time for all of us is probably more of a hindrance than not wanting to have the conversation. I think that it would probably flow pretty easy. We're just going to carve out a system to do it.
Yeah, I guess I sort of look at a conversation is great, but are you going to sit down and talk to somebody about all 35 kids that they may be sending to your school?
Or all 700.
Whatever it happens to be, but that would be spread out among a number of superintendents.
91% of our students come from the BRSU.
Yeah, well, of course.
Yeah.
So I just was curious, and I think of the superintendents who send their students out to 13 different, both approved independent schools and public schools, they don't have the sort of capacity to sit down with 13 people, but they also there isn't a formal sharing of information that is says every quarter we get this type of progress report. That's what I was mostly curious about. If there was something more formal.
I wanted to ask a little bit more about the training. So you're training for 9th graders. The training is geared and targeted for 9th graders in literacy. And just to back up to that, is there any effort to coordinate curriculum like pre-K through 12 so that when they come to you, they're on have certain proficiencies or don't and have plans to address it?
So the teacher, we're providing OG services for grades 9 through 12. Just what my philosophy is that if we can provide 9 and 10 with an intensive intervention, then I'm hoping over time we won't need as intense for 11 and 12. I would love that discussion to carry on to the lower grades, and hopefully that'll evolve as we move forward. Mm-hmm. I do know that one of the districts reached out and wants to have conversations about data sharing and how we can work more together. So I think it's just working through it, and the MTSS discussions kind of kicking some of that stuff off.
Okay. Yeah, pre-COVID, we would have yearly meetings. Our English department, his social studies, world language with our sending town teachers. with sending schools. So there'd be one meeting where all the sending schools would come together by discipline. And there was a lot of that sharing in terms of, proficiencies and where they were trying to get kids to and where we were picking up. That was pre-COVID. And I think, again, MTSS is a great catalyst to get that back and really to have that cohesion.
And with the behavior management skills that you're teaching students, is that working? Are students able to begin to regulate their emotions because of that training?
Well, this is our first year doing it. And I think I think the greatest thing is that students are open to it. We haven't had huge resistance like I have. And part of it is we've built within our school day. Our schedule changed years ago to include what we call flex block. So 3 times a week, we have this time where students are either signing up based on they know, like, I need to see my teacher for this, or a teacher is drafting them. So like, hey, you didn't get this thesis writing. I need to see 10 students, we're going to reteach this and focus on it. And then those students are drafted for that 4-week period. And there's a lot of communication with families, with the students, like, you're going to be meeting for these 4 sessions over the course of the next couple weeks. And so it's not like they're getting pulled from something else. So we're really trying to build the infrastructure and to have those tier 2 interventions happen within the day, and not taking kid from that really important tier 1 core instruction.
Do you work with the designated agencies in your district? And I guess if you do, how does that work?
You mean by designated agencies?
The mental health agencies.
Oh, so UCS, we have 2 full-time mental health clinicians on campus and a school nurse. And then we also contract out some mental health services. And then UCS is our referring agency that we would then connect families with.
And are these generally, do they work almost exclusively with kids who qualify for Medicaid as a funding mechanism?
On our campus or off campus?
I guess on your campus.
So on our campus, no, it's a wide range. We have one outside contractor who takes private insurance, and then we have other UCS clinicians as well. But our model is that some students have mental health services written into their IEP, fewer and fewer, I would say, but they would see our clinicians on campus. Those clinicians are available for sort of short term, like you've got the short-term crisis, you could have 3 or 4 sessions. And if their assessment is you need more, they would refer out and off into UCS.
And so who pays for those clinicians to be there then?
Our campus clinicians,
Yes.
The school does.
And are they hired?
They're not through a UCS contract. They're hired by Burn. Yeah.
Same. We have, I think, 5 mental health counselors on staff, and they're paid by the academy. I know they had 1,157 visits so far this school year.
Representative Stone?
So just going back to my question about mainstreaming, I was really interested about the Target program that you mentioned. So those kids are not educated on the main campus. They're educated elsewhere in Manchester on Richville Road. What is the process like to get into that program? And then is the goal for those children to eventually come back to the main campus or no?
I would say that most of those students actually do a hybrid. There's not any students who are there all day. So they might be there for some core academics in the morning and then come up to Burton in the afternoon to access electives, or they're at Southwest Tech in the morning and then they come to the access program in the afternoon, or they might have their schedule is more flexible because we're on a 4 block. They actually have more flexibility with their time. So some students might have a morning internship and then do their core academics, very individualized at the Target building. It's really one time we allowed a 9th grader to go directly to the Target program, and that was based on ascending school and LEA placement decision. But we really want to have students come to campus for 9th grade, access all the programs, hopefully get re-engaged with learning if their student has been disengaged in their learning, and then our CARS team, our Care for At-Risk Students, is sort of the gatekeeper for that application process. Sometimes the school counselor might recommend it to a student, like to look. There's a visit, parents visit, they learn about the program, they start to craft sort of their plan, what their plan might look like for the next few years. And we have students, on both our campuses who might, in both programs, who might decide like, oh, I'm going to do 10th and 11th grade at Target. I'm going to access this. I'm going to graduate. I'm going to do early college and then be at Castleton for my final year. So there's all kinds of flexible pathways. And that's just one of the programs that kids might access.
Mr. Around the committee, any other questions? I might just throw one out there on a different topic, but what's your cell phone policy?
I'm so glad you asked. So I actually had we have a policy. We allow students to bring cell phones to campus, but they are checked. We have pockets in every classroom and they're checked in. So that's often how teachers take attendance. You're assigned a number. Years ago, I'm number 1, my cell phone's in pocket number 1. That's how they take attendance. So, but I will say that policy is only as good as teachers implement, right? And that this policy was created by teachers with their input and student input. But we still have some teachers who will say like, well, they're, 17 and 18 years old, they can keep it in their bag. So what I said this year is like, we're bringing this back. We're hammering it. We're going to start the right way. And if you have a cell phone problem, it's your problem. Because you can create the culture right from the start. And we've had a much better year with cell phones. But, yeah.
They're allowed to have them on them, but they're not supposed to have them out in the classroom. I don't want to speak too in depth about it because it's not in my wheelhouse, and I don't want to speak on that.
I even addressed parents. I said, please don't call your kid during the day. That's, if you ask a kid, it's like, yeah, I got this text from my mom, or I got this. that's often some of the distraction. That's not the only one, the social media as well, but that's a piece of it.
Thank you very much for.
Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
You on the screen today, but
Good.
Appreciate your time.
And certainly welcome a visit anytime anybody wants to
too.
take the trek. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take your point.
And now Representative Williams, you'll regale us with tales of.
That's right.